Now, to give us more perspective, I'm joined now by Yuval Weber. He's a research assistant professor at Texas A&M's Bush School of Government and Public Service here in Washington, D.C. Yuval, thank you very much for your time. We will win. That's a strong message of defiance from Zelensky. But given that they've also announced that they're running out of ammunition, how strong really is Ukraine?
It's a hard question to answer because on one hand, about 20% of the country is under Russian occupation by forward forces. But on the other hand, Ukraine was able to receive the recommendation yesterday from the European Commission to recommend Ukraine for European Union candidate status. So that is a sort of a big step for Ukraine's future, even if the present is looking pretty worrisome for the Ukrainian forces.
Now, UK's defence chief has said that Russia is failing and strategically lost the conflict. What do you say to that?
So certainly, Russia started the war by trying to invade basically the entire country from 6 different directions. They really did fail at that. So what they've done is effectively try to reduce from 6 to 2 the number of salients with which they're trying to attack Ukraine. So they're having more success at that. But in terms of what they wanted at the beginning of the war, which is really to end all of Ukraine's European aspirations and its ability to exist effectively as an independent country, that has not been successful. So they're having more success at doing something that is much more circumscribed than what they wanted. So even if they're successful in that, the question that, of yours that can be reframed is, would they be satisfied with basically taking over parts of the Donbass compared to what they wanted? And that may or may not be the case. And certainly it's going to put Russia in a period of isolation, for at minimum as long as President Putin is alive and in charge of Russia, but perhaps a generation, if not, decades into the future.
Now, Admiral Sir Tony Radakin is the defence chief who said this, the head of the British Armed Forces. He said in a recent interview that the Russian president had used 25%, or that the Russian president had said he'd used 25% of his country's army and achieved very, very much tiny gains. But if the Defence Ministry hasn't actually announced a death toll for nearly 3 months, how do we know about the state of Russia's military?
So we don't. So we can only infer. So, like, for example, the Russian military has increased the minimum age, or the maximum age with one can enter the Russian armed forces, from 30, now it's 40 years old. And there's a draft bill in the Duma to take it up to 50 years old. So that suggests the manpower issues are so acute in terms of what they have before they get the next conscript class coming in at the end of this year, that they're looking at middle-aged men in order to fill the holes that have been created by whatever losses they've experienced in Ukraine. So it's hard to say with specificity, but the signs aren't good for Russia's ability to maintain this level of fighting on an indefinite basis.
Perhaps at this point, though, Russia's stronger by numbers. As far as Ukrainians are concerned, the death toll in terms of the general population is reportedly to be in the tens of thousands. Some reports state that Russia is doing a very good job of covering up a lot of what's lost by destroying entire towns. How might human rights groups get a sense of the full scale of this devastation, do you think?
So that it's clear that when people have left places such as Mariupol, in which was under occupation without access to fresh food or water for several months, they look like they've just walked out of a Holocaust camp. In terms of they've lost not just so much weight, but they've become deeply, deeply emaciated. So you combine that with things such as what was experienced at Bucha and Irpin, the suburbs outside of Kiev, in which there was just a number of extrajudicial killings. It's clear that there's a lot of violence that will be uncovered over the months and years to come. And that's why, in effect, the Ukrainians are fighting so hard and are so hesitant or resistant to giving up any territory. Because from their perspective, any territory that they give up to the Russians is basically condemning their fellow citizens to those sorts of outcomes. Looking, essentially becoming emaciated, starving to death, or facing, just complete war crimes. And that basically, helps define what are the stakes of the conflict for Ukraine.
And of course, keeping the morale up in this fight is going to be key too. Thank you very much, Yuval, for your time there. Yuval Weber for us.